Nobody opens ChatGPT, writes a flawless prompt from the first attempt, receives perfect output, then closes the tab satisfied. Actual usage looks more like negotiation. You ask something, the model misunderstands you, confidently of course. You clarify, it overcorrects, you narrow the request, it produces something useful surrounded by several paragraphs of polished filler that somehow says nothing at all. Then you repeat the process until a percentage of that becomes acceptable. The strange part is that AI often becomes more valuable the less efficient the interaction is. Exploration matters, iteration matters as well. The side question you didn't originally intend to ask sometimes becomes the important one. People use AI partly because it lowers the friction of thinking out loud. You can test half-formed ideas without committing to them, but the moment every interaction carries visible cost, behavior changes. People become economical, shorter prompts, fewer retries, less experimentation. Human beings become astonishingly concise once they suspect a meter is running somewhere in the background. And that creates a tension the industry hasn't really solved. AI currently depends on iteration to feel useful, but token pricing encourages minimizing iteration. The business model starts quietly pushing against the actual behavior that makes the product valuable. The entire appeal of modern AI systems partly comes from permission to think inefficiently. Remove that feeling, and the relationship changes from exploratory to transactional almost immediately. This is why subscription pricing became so powerful. Fixed monthly pricing hides uncertainty. People stop calculating. They don't monitor themselves. They use the tool casually because the cost already feels psychologically settled. Streaming services figured this out years ago. Nobody watches a film thinking about bandwidth expenditure. AI subscriptions created something similar. The problem is that AI infrastructure is expensive in a way streaming libraries are not. Every request generates fresh computational work. Every wandering conversation about rewriting emails or debugging code still costs somebody money somewhere underneath the interface. And that leads to the uncomfortable question sitting underneath all this discussion. Were users trained into habits that may not actually be sustainable long term? A heavy AI user can easily generate enormous amounts of computation under a relatively cheap subscription. From the user's perspective, that feels efficient. From the provider's perspective, the economics look considerably less good, which is partly why profitability keeps appearing in conversations around AI companies. The public discussion often sounds futuristic and philosophical. The internal discussion, however, is probably much closer to somebody opening spreadsheets and sighing quietly. What makes this more complicated is that AI output still contains meaningful amounts of slop. Sometimes useful slop, sometimes expensive slop, but is still there. You ask for 5 variations because the first 3 missed the point entirely, and the 4th sounded like it was written by a corporate mindfulness consultant trapped inside PowerPoint. Under unlimited pricing, that mostly feels mildly annoying. Under token pricing, the emotional framing changes. Now the failed outputs feel billable. The user starts mentally calculating the cost of the model being wrong, which is not a calculation people enjoy making repeatedly. There is also a behavior-related risk hiding inside token pricing that may gradually discourage curiosity itself. Not completely. Most professionals will still use AI because the productivity gains are real, but usage patterns could become narrower and more outcome-focused. Fewer exploratory conversations, fewer speculative prompts, less intellectual wandering. People optimize for successful outputs instead of discovery, which sounds reasonable until you realize that many useful ideas initially arrive looking inefficient, unnecessary, or even slightly ridiculous. Exploration often appears wasteful right before it becomes valuable. What can also be interesting is that token-based pricing might actually improve certain behaviors. People might write clearer prompts, for example. They may think more carefully before outsourcing vague thinking to the model. There is also a paradox at play, because while we might become more efficient at using AI, efficiency doesn't necessarily translate into intelligence. Some of the best uses of AI come from experimentation without immediate purpose, testing ideas, following odd questions, refining thoughts gradually instead of pretending clarity existed from the start. The current subscription model accidentally encourages that behavior because the user feels no pressure to optimize every interaction. Once optimization enters the experience too aggressively, people start protecting themselves from waste, reasonable financially, but potentially limiting intellectually. Nobody brainstorms naturally while imagining a small accountant sitting beside a keyboard tracking their expenditure. I will not even try to have a conclusion on this yet because a lot depends on how these systems will evolve. Maybe providers will find sustainable pricing that preserves experimentation, maybe hybrid models emerge where exploratory use remains affordable while heavy professional usage becomes more metered. Or maybe users simply adapt and become more deliberate with AI over time. But the current moment does expose something important. We've spent years discussing what AI can do while paying very little attention to how pricing determines the way people actually think with AI. And that eventually may matter more than most product announcements. Thank you for watching.